In the summer of 1526, on the blood-soaked plains of Mohács, a 20-year-old king would make a decision that would echo through the corridors of history for centuries. Here, under the blazing Hungarian sun, the fate of Central Europe hung in the balance as two worlds collided in a battle so swift, so devastating, that it would shatter a kingdom in less than 2 hours. This was not merely a clash of armies. It was the collision between the fading age of medieval chivalry and the dawn of modern warfare, between the dying breath of Hungarian independence and the unstoppable advance of the Ottoman Empire at its zenith. The young King Louis II of Hungary stood at the crossroads of destiny, wielding the remnants of a fractured kingdom against Suleiman the Magnificent, the most feared conqueror of his age. What unfolded that August day was more than a military defeat. It was the moment when the sleeping lion of Hungary fell into an eternal slumber, never again to roar as a unified realm. The reverberations of this single battle would reshape the map of Europe, doom generations to centuries of warfare, and create wounds that would fester for 200 years. But to understand the catastrophe of Mohács, we must first journey back to the web of betrayal, ambition, and desperation that set the stage for this epic confrontation. For this was no sudden invasion, but the culmination of a grand chess game played by kings and sultans across the continent, where Hungary found itself trapped as the sacrificial pawn. The year was 1525, and in the glittering courts of France, a scandalous alliance was being forged that would shock Christendom to its core. King Francis I of France, locked in a bitter struggle with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, made a decision that would horrify his fellow Christian monarchs. He reached across the Mediterranean to clasp hands with the Ottoman Sultan, forming the Franco-Ottoman Alliance that would endure for centuries. This was no mere diplomatic courtesy, but a calculated masterstroke designed to crush the Habsburgs between two fires. The French king's request was simple yet devastating. Make war on the Holy Roman Empire, he urged Suleiman, and relieve the pressure on France. The road from Turkey to the Holy Roman Empire led straight through the heart of Hungary, making the Magyar kingdom the inevitable battleground for this grand strategy. What Francis had unleashed was nothing less than the Ottoman war machine, pointed like an underbelly of Christian dagger at the soft Europe. For Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, this French invitation aligned perfectly with his own imperial ambitions. At 25 years old, he had already proven himself a conqueror worthy of his ancestors, having seized Belgrade in 1521 and the fortress island of Rhodes in 1523. His empire stretched across 3 continents, ruling over 25 million souls, and his appetite for conquest was far from satisfied. The opportunity to strike at the heart of Europe, while simultaneously honoring his French ally, was too tempting to resist. Meanwhile, in the courts of Hungary, the young King Louis II faced a nightmare scenario that would have tested the wisest of monarchs. When news of the coming storm reached him, he desperately appealed to the Christian powers of Europe for aid. Surely, he believed, the princes of Christendom would unite against the Ottoman threat. The response was a crushing betrayal that laid bare the cold realities of 16th century politics. King Henry VIII of England offered assistance, but it would arrive only after the battle was over, reaching Queen Mary of Hungary in 1527 when it was far too late to matter. The Pope offered 50,000 gold pieces, a gesture more symbolic than substantial. But from Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor himself, and from Ferdinand Habsburg, Louis's own brother-in-law and Archduke of Austria, came nothing but silence. The great powers of Europe, consumed by their own rivalries and ambitions, abandoned Hungary to face the Ottoman juggernaut alone. This diplomatic isolation might have been survivable had Hungary been united and strong, but the kingdom was rotting from within. The seeds of its destruction had been planted 12 years earlier, in 1514, when the realm had convulsed with one of the most brutal peasant uprisings in European history. György Dózsa, a minor nobleman turned revolutionary, had led the common people in a savage rebellion against their aristocratic overlords. The uprising was crushed with merciless efficiency by the nobility, led by John Zapolya, but the scars it left would prove fatal when the Ottomans arrived. The brutal suppression that followed the Dózsa Rebellion created a cancer at the heart of Hungarian society. The peasantry, who might have rallied to defend their homeland, had been disarmed and reduced to the most degrading forms of serfdom. Many now viewed the approaching Ottomans not as invaders to be repelled, but as potential liberators from noble oppression. The very people who should have formed the backbone of Hungarian resistance had been alienated by their own ruling class, creating a fatal weakness that Suleiman would exploit without mercy. The Hungarian nobility itself remained fractured and suspicious, with many refusing to obey the commands of their 20-year-old king. Regional rivalries and personal ambitions trumped national survival, leaving Louis with a patchwork force that could never hope to match the disciplined war machine advancing from the south. The political unity that might have compensated for Hungary's military disadvantages had been shattered by years of internal conflict and short-sighted brutality. As spring turned to summer in 1526, the Ottoman preparations for invasion took on a scale that dwarfed anything Europe had witnessed. On April 23rd, Suleiman began his westward march from Belgrade, leading a host that contemporary sources numbered at nearly 100,000 men. This was not a mere raiding party or exploratory force, but the full might of the Ottoman Empire unleashed for conquest. The composition of Suleiman's army revealed the revolutionary nature of Ottoman military organization. Professional soldiers formed the core of his forces, with the elite Janissaries serving as infantry and the Sipahi cavalry providing mobile striking power. These were not feudal levies bound by temporary obligations, but career soldiers whose were devoted to war lives. They had been drilled with firearms and represented perhaps the first standing infantry force equipped with gunpowder weapons in the world. But it was the Ottoman artillery train that truly set Suleiman's army apart from its European contemporaries. 300 cannons accompanied the invasion force, a concentration of firepower that dwarfed anything the Hungarians could muster. While Louis would eventually gather 85 artillery pieces, a respectable number by contemporary standards, it paled in comparison to the Ottoman juggernaut rolling toward Hungarian soil. The technological superiority of the Ottoman forces extended far beyond mere numbers. They had perfected the integration of different military arms into a cohesive fighting force that could adapt to any battlefield condition. Artillery would soften enemy formations, firearms would devastate charging cavalry, and disciplined infantry would hold ground while mobile forces executed encircling maneuvers. This was warfare elevated to a science, conducted by professionals who had studied their craft in the crucible of constant campaign. As the Ottoman host advanced through the Balkans, cities that resisted were razed, while those that surrendered were spared but forced to supply provisions and reinforcements. The methodical nature of Suleiman's approach revealed a commander who understood that victory required more than battlefield prowess. Logistics, intelligence, and psychological warfare all played their part in the grand strategy that would culminate at Mohács. The Hungarian response to this approaching catastrophe was a masterpiece of military incompetence and political miscalculation. King Louis II, displaying the reckless courage that often accompanies inexperience, decided to march south from Buda with a pitifully small force of just 4,000 men. His destination was the plain of Mohács, a name that would soon be seared into Hungarian memory as the graveyard of their independence. At Mohács, reinforcements trickled in like drops of water attempting to fill an ocean. Germans, Poles, and Bohemians joined the Hungarian ranks, bringing the total force to approximately 25,000 men. On paper, this seemed respectable, but the reality was far more grim. These were not the disciplined professionals that Suleiman commanded, but a hodgepodge of feudal levies, mercenaries of questionable loyalty, and nobles more concerned with personal honor than tactical sense. The Hungarian War Council faced a decision that would determine the fate of their kingdom. Reinforcements were marching toward their position forces, additional that could have added 15,000 soldiers to their ranks and significantly improved their chances of survival. All they needed was patience, the wisdom to wait a few more days for these crucial reinforcements to arrive. Instead, they made a choice that would echo through history as one of the most catastrophic military decisions ever recorded. The council chose to fight immediately, abandoning strategic patience for the illusion of bold action. The battlefield they selected near Mohács was an open plain broken by marshes and uneven ground, terrain that favored neither defense nor the kind of coordinated cavalry charge that represented Hungary's primary tactical advantage. It was as if they had deliberately chosen the worst possible conditions under which to face the most formidable army of their age. The Hungarian battle plan relied entirely on outdated medieval tactics that had been obsolete for decades. They intended to deploy their armored knights in a massive cavalry charge, trusting in the shock effect of heavy horse to break the Ottoman lines. This might have worked against the armies of previous centuries, But against Suleiman's gunpowder-equipped professionals, it was tantamount to suicide. The Hungarian commanders had failed to grasp the fundamental transformation that firearms had brought to warfare, clinging to the glorious past while the future marched toward them with cannon and musket. Behind the Hungarian lines, the young King Louis himself embodied both the nobility and the tragic folly of his doomed army. At 20 years old, he possessed the courage of youth, but lacked the wisdom that might have saved his kingdom. His nobles, fractured by regional rivalries and personal ambitions, had pressured him into this premature battle, their pride and impatience overwhelming any strategic sense they might have possessed. Meanwhile, Suleiman's forces deployed with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. The Sultan had personally led 13 military campaigns during his reign, spending over 10 years in the field, and his experience showed in every aspect of his army's preparation. The Ottoman battle line stretched across the plain like a steel trap, with artillery positioned to create killing fields. Janissaries arranged to deliver devastating volleys of musket fire, and cavalry positioned to exploit any breakthrough or pursue fleeing enemies. The technological disparity between the two armies was staggering in its implications. While the Hungarians clung to the weapons and tactics of the medieval past, the Ottomans deployed innovations that would define warfare for centuries to come. Their Janissaries had perfected the kneeling firing position, allowing them to deliver sustained volleys of musket fire with unprecedented accuracy and rate of fire. This technique would later be adopted by armies across Europe and Asia, but at Mohács it remained an Ottoman secret weapon. The Ottoman artillery represented another revolutionary advancement in military technology. Their 300 cannons were not merely larger in number than the Hungarian guns, but superior in design, range, and effectiveness. Ottoman engineers had mastered the art of coordinated artillery bombardment, turning individual cannons into components of a devastating system that could shatter enemy formations before they could close to combat range. As the two armies faced each other across the plain of Mohács on that fateful August morning, the contrast could not have been more stark. On one side stood the flower of Hungarian chivalry, brave men clad in gleaming armor who represented the dying embers of medieval warfare. Their banners fluttered in the morning breeze, their lances gleamed in the sunlight, and their horses stamped impatiently as they prepared for what they believed would be a glorious charge that would drive the invaders from Hungarian soil. On the other side waited the most advanced military force in the world, a professional army equipped with the latest weapons and trained in tactics that represented the cutting edge of military science. The Janissaries stood in perfect ranks, their muskets loaded and ready, while behind them the artillery crews made final adjustments to their cannons. This was not merely an army, but a war machine designed to crush any opponent through superior firepower, coordination, and discipline. The stage was set for a confrontation that would last less than 2 hours, but reshape the map of Europe for centuries. The Hungarian nobles, convinced of their own martial superiority, saw only an opportunity for glory. They failed to recognize that they were about to ride into the maw of a military revolution that would devour their kingdom, their king, and their dreams of independence in a storm of gunpowder and steel. The morning sun climbed higher into the clear August sky as the final preparations were completed. Soon, the thunder of hooves would give way to the roar of cannons, the clash of steel would be drowned by the crack of muskets, and the ancient kingdom of Hungary would breathe its last breath on the blood-soaked fields of Mohács. The lion was about to fall, and with it would die an age. The battle began not with the thunderous clash of arms that legends would later describe, but with a deadly stillness that seemed to stretch across the plain like a held breath. As the sun reached its zenith on August 29th, 1,526, 30,000 Hungarian souls stood arrayed in their final formation, their armor glinting like scattered jewels against the dark earth of Mohács. 6 kilometers of riverside plain stretched before them, the Danube flowing silently to their east, as if nature itself waited to witness the unfolding catastrophe. King Louis II sat astride his warhorse at the center of his army, his young face set with determination that masked the uncertainty gnawing at his heart. Around him, the cream of Hungarian nobility adjusted their armor and whispered prayers, their confidence buoyed by centuries of martial tradition. They had faced Ottoman raiders before and emerged victorious. Surely this would be no different, they told themselves, even as the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble with an ominous rhythm. To the south, beyond the gentle rise of the plain, Suleiman's vast host deployed with mechanical precision. The Sultan himself watched from his command position as regiments of Janissaries formed their deadly squares, their white felt caps bobbing like foam on a dark sea. Behind them, artillery crews worked with practiced efficiency, adjusting elevation and loading charges that would soon transform the peaceful Hungarian countryside into a hellscape of smoke and thunder. The Ottoman deployment revealed the genius of their military system. Unlike the Hungarian forces, which relied primarily on the feudal levy and the personal courage of individual knights, Suleiman's army operated as a single organism. Each component had its role to play in a grand symphony of destruction that would unfold with terrifying coordination. The Sipahi cavalry took position on the flanks, their colorful banners creating a rainbow of death that would soon sweep across the field. In the center, rank upon rank of Janissaries prepared to demonstrate why they were considered the finest infantry in the world. The technological revolution that was about to unfold at Mohács represented more than mere military advancement. It was the death knell of an entire way of life, the final act in a drama that had been playing out across Europe for decades. The Hungarian knights who prepared to charge represented the last flowering of medieval chivalry, men who believed that personal valor and divine favor could triumph over any earthly force. They were about to discover that the age of gunpowder showed no respect for noble blood or ancient tradition. As the morning wore on, the Hungarian commanders made their final preparations for what they believed would be a decisive cavalry charge. Their battle plan was simple in its medieval logic. The heavy cavalry would smash through the Ottoman center, scattering the enemy infantry and creating panic in their ranks. Once the Ottoman line was broken, the Hungarian infantry would advance to complete the that might out. It was a plan have succeeded brilliantly against the armies of previous generations, but against Suleiman's professionals, it was a blueprint for annihilation. The Hungarian cavalry formed up in magnificent array, their lances creating a forest of steel points that caught the afternoon sunday. These were men who had trained from childhood for this moment, warriors whose entire identity was bound up in their ability to charge across an open field and break enemy formations through sheer momentum and courage. They had no conception that they were about to ride into the most concentrated firepower that had ever been assembled on a European battlefield. The Ottoman artillery crews completed their preparations with methodical care. 300 cannons of various sizes stood ready to unleash a storm of iron and flame that would transform the physics of warfare itself. The larger siege guns could hurl massive stone balls with enough force to pulverize castle walls, while the smaller field pieces fired grapeshot, designed to scythe down charging cavalry like wheat before a blade. Behind these guns, ammunition wagons stood ready to feed the hungry maws of the bronze and iron monsters that would soon speak with voices of thunder. The Janissaries made their own final preparations, checking flints and adjusting their formations with the precision that came from years of drill and discipline. These men were not mere soldiers but professionals who had devoted their lives to the art of war. Many were Christians who had been taken as children and raised within the Ottoman system, molded into warriors whose loyalty to the Sultan was absolute and whose skill with firearms was unmatched anywhere in the world. They would demonstrate techniques at Mohács that European armies would not master for decades. The fateful moment arrived with the kind of casual inevitability that marks all great tragedies. A Hungarian herald rode forward, under a flag of truce, perhaps hoping for some last-minute negotiation that might avert the coming catastrophe. The gesture was noble but futile. Suleiman had not marched across the Balkans with 100,000 men to engage in diplomatic niceties. He had come to break Hungarian power once and for all, and no amount of brave posturing would deflect him from his purpose. The herald returned to Hungarian lines, and King Louis gave the signal that would echo through history. Hungarian war horns sounded across the plain, their brazen voices calling the knights to their final charge. 30,000 voices raised in a battle cry that had once struck fear into the hearts of enemies across Europe. But the sound seemed to die in the thick air, swallowed by the vastness of the plain and the ominous silence from the Ottoman lines. The Hungarian cavalry surged forward like a steel tide, their horses' hooves drumming against the earth in a rhythm that had decided countless medieval battles. From their perspective, it must have seemed glorious beyond description. The flower of Hungarian chivalry rode toward destiny with banners streaming and lances leveled, each knight convinced that divine providence and personal valor would carry the day. They charged with the accumulated momentum of centuries of military tradition, unaware that they were rushing toward the end of their world. For a brief, shining moment, It seemed as if the old ways might triumph after all. The Hungarian charge struck the Ottoman vanguard with tremendous force, and the leading ranks of the enemy line wavered under the impact. Knights crashed into infantry formations, their lances piercing mail and flesh, while their war horses trampled fallen enemies beneath iron-shod hooves. The Hungarians pressed forward, scenting victory and driving deeper into the Ottoman deployment. But Suleiman had anticipated this moment, and his response revealed the gulf between medieval and modern warfare. The Ottoman artillery, which had remained silent during the Hungarian advance, suddenly erupted in a coordinated bombardment that transformed the battlefield into a vision of hell. 300 cannons spoke as one, their voices merging into a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Stone balls and grapeshot tore through the Hungarian ranks with indiscriminate fury, turning proud knights into broken corpses in the space of heartbeats. The Janissaries added their own deadly contribution to the symphony of destruction. Rank after rank of musket-armed infantry delivered coordinated volleys that created walls of lead through which no cavalry charge could pass. The kneeling firing position that the Ottomans had perfected allowed them to maintain continuous fire, with one rank reloading while another delivered its volley. The Hungarian knights found themselves riding not into glory, but into a storm of metal that no amount of armor could deflect. The technological superiority of the Ottoman forces became devastatingly apparent as the battle reached its climax. While the Hungarians relied on individual prowess and the shock effect of massed cavalry, the Ottomans deployed coordinated firepower that turned warfare into a mathematical equation. Superior numbers plus superior technology plus superior coordination equaled inevitable victory, regardless of the personal courage displayed by their enemies. The Hungarian charge, which had begun with such magnificent promise, dissolved into chaos and carnage as Ottoman firepower took its toll. Knights tumbled from their saddles, their armor no protection against the concentrated musket fire that swept their ranks. Horses screamed and fell, creating obstacles that disrupted the formations of those behind. What had been a coordinated assault became a desperate melee as individual knights found themselves isolated and surrounded by enemies who fought with disciplined precision rather than individual heroism. King Louis himself was swept up in the carnage, his royal banner providing a rallying point for those Hungarian knights who still retained their mounts and their weapons. Around him, the remnants of his army fought with the desperate courage of men who knew they faced annihilation. But courage alone could not overcome the mathematical reality of the battlefield. The Ottomans had deployed superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior tactics, creating a killing field from which few would escape. The Ottoman Sipahi cavalry, which had remained in reserve during the initial clash, now swept forward to complete the encirclement of the Hungarian forces. These light horsemen, armed with bows and sabers, moved with fluid precision around the flanks of the disintegrating Hungarian army. Their role was not to break enemy formations through shock action, but to prevent escape and to hunt down fleeing enemies. They executed this mission with the efficiency that characterized every aspect organization of Ottoman military. As the Hungarian army crumbled under the weight of superior firepower and coordination, individual acts of heroism became meaningless against the inexorable logic of modern warfare. Knights who had trained their entire lives for single combat found themselves facing enemies who fought as components of a larger machine. The personal relationships and feudal obligations that bound the Hungarian army together proved inadequate against the professional discipline that unified their opponents. The battle that was supposed to save Hungarian independence instead became its funeral pyre. In less than 2 hours, a kingdom that had endured for centuries was reduced to scattered remnants fleeing across the blood-soaked plain. The sleeping lion of Hungary had not merely been defeated but mortally wounded, its death throes echoing across a field littered with the broken dreams of a vanished age. The Battle of Mohács stands as one of history's most decisive turning points, a moment when the medieval world died in a storm of gunpowder and steel. In less than 2 hours, Suleiman's military revolution shattered not just an army, but an entire way of life. The sleeping lion of Hungary would never again roar as a unified kingdom, its territory carved up between Ottoman, Habsburg, and Transylvanian masters for the next 2 centuries. The young King Louis, drowned beneath the weight of his own armor, became the perfect symbol of a feudal age crushed by modernity's relentless advance. Mohács proved that courage and honor, however noble, could not stand against superior technology, professional discipline, and strategic genius. The hammer of the Ottomans had fallen, and with it, the fate of Central Europe was forever changed.